We've come to the ruins of what may be finally correctly identified as the city of Ziklag. Ziklag is the community where David lived. You'll find the story at the very end of 1 Samuel, and it really is one of the most intriguing stories of David's life. Now, archaeologists have identified several locations that may be Ziklag, but in recent months, this particular dig has risen to the top of the list. It's in the perfect location. David's working for the king of Gath, not very far from here. And he is also raiding parties south of here. So it makes sense that Ziklag should be in this location. Now, the story of what David was doing in Ziklag and what happened to David is actually, to me, much more important than the ruins, whether or not this is actually the city. Here's how it goes. As David was working for the king, fighting for the king, there came a time when there was going to be a big battle between the Philistines and the armies of Saul, who was still king of Judah, way up north in the Jezreel Valley near Beit Shan. Now, David volunteered to go with the king of Gath, and the king loved David and had really benefited from David's fighting men. He said, yeah, join us. But by the time they make the probably 3-day journey all the way up to the battlefield, the other Philistine generals, the other Philistine kings, said, no, there's no way David is fighting with us. He won't fight with us. When he sees Saul fall, he's going to attack us and he'll be king. It was pretty logical. They told David to turn around and to go home. And so David and his men make the long journey back to Ziklag. They're physically exhausted. They're emotionally disappointed. They had tried to do something. They'd been insulted. And when they get to Ziklag, they found a disaster. The city had been burned, all of their possessions had been stolen, and worst of all, their wives and their children had been kidnapped. Oh, they were in great distress. They were so wild with their grief and anxiety that the men were talking about stoning David. They were going to blame it on him. Now, David sought the Lord, and he found solace in the Lord. And then he got the priest to come to him, and he prayed and he asked God for direction. Should I go and chase the Amalekites? And the Lord gave him the answer, yes, go, you'll catch them. And so David and his men take off south of here, and they find the Amalekites. And the short end of the story is they defeat the Amalekites, they recover their families, no one was harmed. And they recover all of the plunder the Amalekites had gathered, not only from Ziklag, but from many other communities. David comes home, finds out Saul is dead, goes to Hebron, and he becomes king of Judah. And a few years later, he's king of Judah in the south and Israel in the north. In a way, you might say, well, look, the story had a happy ending. Let's go to the next chapter. But I want to draw your attention to something very important. David is identified in the Bible as a man after God's own heart. Now, maybe you've wanted to be a man after God's own heart, a woman after God's own heart. Maybe you're a young person looking ahead in your life. And maybe once in a while it occurs to you, how in the world could I live a life pleasing to God? I'd love to have that title said about me, a man after God's own heart, a person after God's own heart. Well, Ziklag holds the clue. Because you see, when everything fell apart for David, when people were talking about killing him because of their community grief, it says that David found his strength in the Lord. That's it. He turned to the Lord. And he asked the priest to come, and they pray together, and he feels like the Lord has given him an answer, and he follows those instructions. David is one of the few people you would say that, yes, that's a person after God's own heart. And the Bible actually gave him that title. You know what? You could have that title. Any of us can. Find your strength in the Lord. Pray like you're expecting an answer. And when you get that answer, follow the instructions. You'll be a person after God's own heart. That's a message right out of the Bible and right out of these rocks that may indeed be the Ziklag where David found his strength in the Lord on the worst day of his life. That's the lesson from Ziklag. It's one of the greatest lessons the Bible can ever give any of us for any life situation. Thanks for joining us. I'm Andy Cook.